Imagine you are 80 years old, and the most exciting thing that has happened this week is that someone left a passive-aggressive note about the communal garden. Not because your life is empty, not because the years have drained you of curiosity or sharpness or the specific pleasure of a well-constructed argument, but because the world, somewhere along the way, quietly stopped asking for what you have. Stopped consulting the decades of accumulated knowledge and pattern recognition and hard-won understanding of how human beings actually behave when they think no one important is watching. You live in a retirement village. It is a very nice retirement village. There are activities. There are meals. There are neighbors who are interesting and neighbors who are not in a social landscape that is, if you pay attention, and you always pay attention, considerably more complex and more charged than anyone from the outside would guess. Because the outside looks at a retirement village and sees people waiting. And you are not waiting. You have never been the kind of person who waits. You have been, at various points in your life, a nurse and a spy and a psychiatrist and a trade union activist. You have seen things that the people who underestimate you could not imagine. You have solved problems, real problems, problems with actual stakes, problems where the cost of getting it wrong was measured in lives, that the people who pat you on the hand and speak too slowly have never encountered. And now someone has been murdered. In your village. In your quiet, passive-aggressive note-leaving, communal garden-disputing village. And the Thursday Murder Club, which has been meeting every Thursday to review cold cases with a thoroughness that the original investigators might find humbling, has a live one. Finally, this is the Thursday Murder Club, and Richard Osman is doing something that sounds like the setup for a cozy mystery, and turns out to be, underneath its considerable pleasures as exactly that, a genuinely moving meditation on what it means to be old in a world that has stopped looking at you. On the difference between being finished and being underestimated. On the specific, irreplaceable value of people who have lived long enough to have seen everything and are still paying attention. Who was Richard Osman when he wrote this book? Richard Osman is one of those figures whose public profile in one domain made it easy to underestimate what he was capable of in another. In Britain, he was known as the tall, witty co-host of the quiz show Pointless, a television personality, a familiar face, someone who occupied the specific cultural space of beloved light entertainment. He was funny and warm and clever in the way that television rewards, and this was his identity. And then he wrote a novel that became the fastest-selling debut crime novel in UK publishing history. A novel that sold over 1 million copies before anyone had fully processed what had happened. The success was not accidental, and it was not simply the result of his existing profile, though that certainly helped. The Thursday Murder Club succeeded because it did the thing that the best genre fiction always does. It used the conventions of a beloved form to say something that the form is not always asked to say. It used the cozy mystery, with all its pleasures of puzzle and place and character, to make an argument about the value of old people that the culture around us consistently fails to make. Osman has spoken about how the book began with the characters, with 4 elderly people who arrived in his imagination fully formed, each one a specific and irreducible person with a complete history and a complete interior life. He was interested in writing older characters who were not defined by their age, whose age was a fact about them rather than the thing they were about. Who were funny and sharp and complicated and capable of love and capable of error and capable of solving a murder. The same things any protagonist is capable of, simply further along the road. He was also interested in death, not morbidly, but honestly, in the specific relationship with mortality that people in their late 70s and 80s have, the way it becomes familiar, the way the losses accumulate, the way the knowledge that time is finite changes how you spend it and what you pay attention to. He wanted to write characters who had this relationship with death and who were, because of it rather than in spite of it, particularly well-suited to investigating it. Let us enter the world of the book. Cooper's Chase is a retirement village in the English countryside. It is the expensive kind, the kind with a spa and a lecture program, and a choice of dining rooms, and a waiting list populated by people who have sold their large houses, and are arriving with their accumulated capital and their accumulated opinions, and their complete refusal to consider this the end of anything. The Thursday Murder Club meets in the Jigsaw Room. It began as an exercise, a way of reviewing cold cases from the files that one of their number had access to, a way of keeping the mind engaged, a way of doing what they had always done, think, in the context of a life that no longer provided the external structures that had previously organized that thinking. There are 4 of them. Elizabeth is the one who was a spy. She does not say she was a spy. She says she worked for the government. The precision with which she declines to specify is itself a form of specification. She is 78 years old, immaculate, terrifying in the specific way of people who know exactly what they are capable of and have no interest in reassuring you about it. She is also, underneath the terrifying, the person in the room who cares most about the people in the room and who is most careful about never letting this be visible. She has a husband, Stephen, who is retreating into dementia by degrees that Elizabeth monitors and measures and carries with a grief she will not discuss and does not need to discuss because the way she looks at him contains everything. Joyce is the one who is a nurse. She keeps a diary, and the diary chapters are one of the book's great pleasures, Joyce's voice, which is warm and observational and occasionally accidentally devastating, providing a counterpoint to the thriller mechanics of the main narrative. She notices things, not in the trained, intelligence operative way that Elizabeth notices things, but in the long practice of paying attention to people way that 30 years of nursing produces. She knows when something is wrong with a person before the person knows. She brings biscuits. She is not to be underestimated. Ibrahim is the one who is a psychiatrist. He is precise and formal and genuinely kind in the way of someone who has spent decades being professionally kind and discovered that the professional kindness eventually became the real kind. He processes information differently from the others, in patterns, in behavioral frameworks, in the structures of motivation and response that psychiatry provides. He is the most emotionally fragile of the 4, in the specific way of people whose intelligence has always been their primary protection and who are discovering, at this stage of life, that intelligence is not protection against everything. Ron is the one who was a trade union activist. He is loud and opinionated and has a son who is a famous former footballer, and he brings to every situation the energy of someone who has spent their life in rooms where people were arguing about things that mattered and who therefore cannot take seriously a world that does not argue properly. He is the most obviously lovable of the 4, which means he is also the one most likely to be underestimated, which means he is useful in ways he is aware of and deploys deliberately. And then there is the murder. Or rather, there is the property developer who is planning to expand Cooper's Chase in ways that some residents find acceptable and some find unconscionable. And there is the question of what happened to the planning consultant who was involved in the expansion. And there are the police officers assigned to the case, Chris and Donna, a veteran detective and his new constable, who are going to find, to their initial frustration and eventual gratitude, that the 4 members of the Thursday Murder Club are not the peripheral characters in this story. They are the detectives. Now we go to the heart of it. The central pleasure of the Thursday Murder Club is the one that all great cozy mysteries provide, the puzzle, the community, the satisfaction of intelligence applied to chaos, until the chaos resolves into pattern. Osman is genuinely good at the mechanics of the form. The mystery is fairly constructed. The clues are present. The solution is surprising and inevitable in the way that good mystery solutions always are. But the central question of the book, the one underneath the mystery, is the one that Osman is really asking from the first page. What do we do with the wisdom of people who have been written off? Elizabeth and Joyce and Ibrahim and Ron are not investigating this murder because they have nothing better to do. They are investigating it because they are better equipped to investigate it than almost anyone else available. Between them, they have decades of intelligence work, psychiatric practice, medical observation, and the particular tactical intelligence of someone who has spent a career outmaneuvering people who had structural power over him. They have, collectively, everything that detective work requires: the ability to read people, the patience for process, the willingness to sit with ambiguity, the experience to recognize when someone is lying and when they are simply afraid. They also have something the younger investigators do not have. They have nothing to lose. The social calculations that constrain younger people, the career implications of saying the wrong thing, the reputational risk of pursuing an unpopular line of inquiry, the personal stakes of being wrong. These calculations have a different weight when you are in your late 70s, and the only reputation you are managing is the one inside Cooper's Chase. This freedom, which looks like disadvantage from the outside, is one of the book's most interesting arguments. Old age, with all its losses, provides a specific kind of liberty that youth cannot access. Osman writes, through Elizabeth's perspective, that the greatest advantage of being old was that you already knew how most stories ended. You had seen versions of all of them. And knowing how stories ended was the most useful thing you could know when you were trying to figure out who had written one. The parallel police investigation, Chris and Donna working the official case, provides the book's second narrative thread and its most interesting secondary relationship. Chris is a detective of the old school, experienced, competent, carrying a personal history that the case touches in ways he did not predict. Donna is young, ambitious, immediately taken with the Thursday Murder Club in a way her professional instincts tell her she should be more guarded about. Their dynamic is warm and lightly comic, and also genuinely interesting. Two people learning how to work together across a generational gap, and a difference in how they think about almost everything. Their relationship with the Thursday Murder Club, the official investigators reluctantly acknowledging the unofficial ones, is one of the book's great ongoing pleasures, because the club is better than them, not at everything, but at the specific things the case requires, and Chris and Donna know it and are trying to figure out what to do about knowing it. Let us talk about what this book is really saying. The first great theme is the invisibility of the old and the cost of that invisibility. The residents of Cooper's Chase are invisible to the people who murdered in their vicinity, because people who commit crimes in retirement villages are not worried about being caught by the residents. The residents are wallpaper. They are background. They are the people who notice everything and about whom it is assumed that their noticing is irrelevant. This is the mystery genre's oldest trick, the detective who is underestimated, but Osman is using it to make a point that extends beyond the genre. The underestimation of old people is not a quirk of criminals. It is a feature of the culture. We do not ask old people for help. We do not consult them on problems. We do not, generally speaking, walk into a room of 80-year-olds and think, here is a resource. Here is accumulated wisdom and pattern recognition, and hard-won understanding that I should be trying to access. We think, here is a group of people I should speak slowly to. The Thursday Murder Club is a revenge fantasy for everyone who has ever been in that group, who has felt the specific, infuriating experience of being spoken to slowly by someone who would benefit enormously from listening to what you have to say. It is also an invitation for everyone not yet in that group to look again. The second great theme is friendship as the architecture of survival. The four members of the club are not friends in the way young people are friends. They did not grow up together. They do not share a history that predates the retirement village. They came to each other late and built something from late materials. The friendship they have constructed is the friendship of people who know exactly how much time they have left and have decided to spend it with people who are interesting. There is something both comic and deeply moving about this, the deliberate construction of intimacy at a stage of life when intimacy is harder to find and more necessary than ever. They bicker. They misread each other. They maintain, each of them, significant private reserves that the others do not have access to. But they show up. They are there. And the being there, the reliable, unconditional, sometimes exasperating being there, is the form that love takes at this stage of life when the grand gestures are behind you, and what remains is simply presence. The third great theme is the relationship between death and attention. The members of the Thursday Murder Club live with death in a way that younger people do not. Not because they are morbid, but because they are honest. Friends have died. Spouses have died. The village itself is a place where people come to live the last chapter, and the last chapter is a chapter that contains death as a presence rather than a distant abstraction. And this proximity to death, this long familiarity with the thing that everyone is eventually going to encounter, makes them, paradoxically, better at investigating it. They are not frightened by death in the way that makes it impossible to look at directly. They have looked at it directly many times. They know its texture. They know what the grief looks like in a person who has lost someone and what it looks like in a person who is performing the grief. They know the difference because they have felt the real thing and watched the performance, and the gap between them is, at close range, visible. Now let us look at these characters as the people they truly are. Elizabeth is the character around whom the book ultimately turns, and she is Osmond's most complex creation. Her competence is absolute, and it is not a disguise for anything. She really is that capable, that controlled, that terrifying in the specific way of intelligence that has been applied to human behavior for decades. But her competence is also, the book reveals slowly, the thing she uses to manage the one situation in which she is powerless. Stephen, her husband who is disappearing. Her husband who was the person she loved most completely and who is, day by day, becoming someone she does not fully recognize. The control she exercises over every other element of her environment is the only available response to the one thing she cannot control. And when the book lets us see this, when it lets us into the private reality of Elizabeth and Stephen's evenings together, the rituals and the tenderness and the specific grief of loving someone who is still there and increasingly not there simultaneously, the character who has been comic and formidable becomes something else, becomes the person underneath the formidability, becomes someone we love. Joyce is the book's greatest gift to readers who need a way in. She is the most accessible, the most immediately warm, the one whose diary voice makes the reader feel immediately at home. But she is not simply charming. She is sharp, in the way that people who have spent their lives being underestimated by people who found them too warm to take seriously are sharp. She notices the things the plot requires her to notice. She asks the questions the plot requires her to ask. And she does all of this while bringing biscuits and making tea and presenting to the world the face of someone who is simply being pleasant. Ibrahim's arc in this book, and across the series, involves a vulnerability that is more directly stated than the vulnerabilities of the others. Something happens to him that tests the framework of coping he has constructed and reveals, beneath the psychiatric precision, a man who has his own limits. His chapters have a different quality from the others, more interior, more careful, more aware of the machinery of his own responses. He is the book's mind, and the book loves him for it, and the book also asks whether the mind is always sufficient protection. Ron is the book's heart and its most deliberate comic engine. He is big and loud and wrong about things with enormous confidence, and occasionally completely right about things that the others miss, because they were looking for subtler signals. His relationship with his son Jason, famous, wealthy, slightly embarrassed by his father, deeply devoted to his father, unable to say the devotion directly, is rendered with the specific comedy and tenderness of a father-son dynamic that has been running long enough to have its own elaborate private grammar. Chris and Donna are, in a lesser book, the procedural frame through which the real story is told. In this book, they are real people. Chris's history, what he is carrying, what the case touches in him, what Donna slowly learns about the person underneath the professional exterior, gives the police subplot its own emotional weight. And Donna's trajectory, her growing attachment to the club, her growing understanding of what she is looking at when she looks at them, her willingness to work with them in ways that her professional obligations technically do not permit, is the book's argument, delivered through behavior rather than speech, that the underestimation of old people is a choice rather than a necessity. What has this book done in the world? The Thursday Murder Club became, upon its publication in September 2020, a cultural event in the United Kingdom and then an international one. Its speed of success was remarkable. The fastest-selling debut crime novel in UK history is a specific and measurable distinction that tells you something about the size of the appetite it was feeding. The appetite was not simply for cozy mystery, though the cozy mystery readership is large and devoted and had been waiting for exactly this. The appetite was for the characters. Readers did not primarily talk about the plot, though the plot is good. They talked about Elizabeth and Joyce and Ibrahim and Ron as if they were people they knew, as if they had spent time with them, as if they missed them when the book was finished. This is the response that the best character-driven fiction generates, and it is a specific response, different from the admiration for a well-constructed plot or a beautifully written sentence, closer to the feeling of having been in the presence of someone real. Osman created 4 people who felt real, which means he created 4 people whose reality the reader could test against their own experience of real people and find the test passed. The series has continued across multiple volumes, each returning to Cooper's Chase and the Thursday Murder Club with new cases and new revelations, and the ongoing deepening of the characters that the best series fiction provides. The community of readers who love these books is large and passionate, and organized in the specific way of people who have found something they did not know they were looking for and are telling everyone they know. A film adaptation is in development, which will introduce the characters to an audience that has not yet met them. The casting question, who plays Elizabeth, who plays Joyce, has been a topic of discussion among fans with the intensity usually reserved for things that actually matter. Now let me be honest with you. The Thursday Murder Club is not a book that is trying to be difficult. It is not interested in challenging its readers' assumptions about what literature should do or how it should be written. It is interested in being enormously pleasurable and genuinely moving, and it succeeds at both with a consistency that is itself a form of craft. If you approach it expecting something that will reward close literary analysis, you will find it instead rewarding something more basic, the pure pleasure of excellent company. The mystery plot is well constructed, but it is not the primary reason to read the book. The primary reason is the characters. Readers who need the mystery mechanics to be their first priority may find the character work occasionally diverts the plot longer than they prefer. Readers who will follow Elizabeth and Joyce wherever they go and trust that the plot will be there when they return will find the book essentially impossible to put down. Osman's prose is clean and warm and occasionally very funny. The Joyce Diary chapters in particular demonstrate a comic timing that the broader narrative voice, somewhat more conventional, does not always match. The moments of genuine emotional weight, the Stephen material especially, are handled with a restraint that makes them more affecting than a more elaborate treatment would produce. Who should read this book? Anyone who has a parent or grandparent they have been underestimating. Anyone who is approaching or in the chapter of life that the culture has decided is the final one, and who needs a book that argues, entertainingly and with considerable evidence, that this is incorrect. Anyone who loves a good mystery and wants one that will make them cry in a way they did not see coming. Anyone who needs to be reminded that the people who have lived the longest have seen the most and know the most and deserve to be asked. Read it if you want a book that will make you feel better about getting older. Read it if you want to understand what is actually inside the people who live in the places we build to contain our old and then stop looking at. Read it if you need the specific pleasure of watching someone who has been written off prove, methodically and with evident satisfaction, that the write-off was premature. We reach the end. Richard Osman wrote The Thursday Murder Club as a love letter to the people the world has stopped paying attention to. To the 80-year-olds who are still paying attention to everything. To the retirement village residents who know more about human nature than the people who built the village to contain them. To the Elizabeths and the Joyces and the Ibrahims and the Rons who are sitting in pleasant rooms in pleasant buildings, being spoken to slowly by people who have no idea what they are looking at. He wanted to write a book that said, "Look again." That said, the person you have decided is finished is not finished. The person whose experience you are not consulting is the person whose experience you most need. The person who has been alive for 80 years in full possession of their faculties has information that no amount of youth or technology or contemporary competence can replicate. And the world's failure to ask for that information is not a neutral oversight. It is a loss. A real, measurable, ongoing loss of exactly the kind of wisdom that the specific problems of the present moment require. Elizabeth and Joyce and Ibrahim and Ron solve the murder. This is not a spoiler. It is the premise. The premise is the argument. Of course they solve it. They are the best people available to solve it. They have everything the job requires and nothing to lose by doing it. The world kept walking past them, and they were in there all along, in the jigsaw room, every Thursday, waiting to be asked. Nobody asked. So they went ahead without being asked. As they always have. As they always will. The case is solved. The biscuits are finished. The tea has gone cold. Joyce makes a note in her diary. And next Thursday, they will meet again. Because there is always another case. And because this is the part the book wants you to take with you when you leave, there is nothing in the world, quite like spending time with people who have seen everything and are still paying attention. Sonnet 4.6.